Guys, we're gonna get started talking about Module 9. This is Apologia, and I'm trying to get my face down there. This is Module 9. This is Apologia Biology, 3rd edition. This is the second semester for CC students in Challenge 2. And we're talking about the prokaryotics and the viruses and more. And as we get started, just kind of want to give you a little background. This second semester, we're going to tie a lot of words together that we should already know, but don't freak out if you don't remember them. Don't think you're just not a great science person or biology person if you can't remember them or your memory's going. That's fine because that's what this is for. I'm hoping I can tie some words together for you and tie them back to previous modules. I wish I'd done this in the fall for all the other modules, but hey, sorry, my time, it just didn't happen. But we're going to try to do them for each module this semester. So let's go ahead and start, and let's talk about what we know already. This is Module 9. So prokaryotics, you guys, for the most part, should remember what prokaryotics are. If you remember, pro means before, karyot means kernel. So before kernel, not Colonel Sanders. Not talking about chicken. We're talking about pro means first, before. So the first guys without a kernel, a nucleus. So these guys don't have a nucleus. And if you remember right from for module, what was it, module 4, cell structure and function, remember that everything, eukaryotic cells have a nucleus, and that a nucleus is where we put our DNA, where we put our information in a safe place. Well, prokaryotics don't have that, and we're going to talk about that because we're going to look at bacteria and how prone they are to changes, how prone they are to the environment. We're going to look at all that and to go a little bit more in depth about that with the prokaryotic guys, the guys that don't have a nucleus. So if you remember that from Module 4, if you also remember from Module 1 when we were talking, just because prokaryotics don't have a nucleus doesn't mean that they don't have DNA and nuclear material, because they do. They need that genetic material. We learned that back in Module 1. Okay, so kind of roll that around in your head a little bit as we get going and as we think about these things. Okay, so as we're moving along, wait, I want to quit. It's just moving too fast. Before we get going, let's talk about where we're at, because we've gone from all this basic learning of things to now we're going to put it in a little bit of an application as we look at all the creatures that we're going to look at, all the critters that we're going to look at. And when I say critters, I mean, not just always mean animal critters, but I mean plant critters, I mean fungi critters, and protist critters, and bacteria critters, and virus critters. They're all of them are critters, okay, to me. Even though technically, we'll get into talking about plants a little later. They're very different. And we already know that from Module 4 and Module 5. We already know that plants are very different. Autotrophs are very different than our heterotrophs. But let's check out what David had to say about it in 148. Praise the Lord from the earth, you great sea creatures in all depths. Hail, fire and hail, snow and mist, stormy wind, fulfilling his word. Mountains and all hills, fruit trees and all cedars, beasts and all livestock, creepy things and flying birds. So basically that kind of gives us an idea of where we're going. We're not going to study weather, but we are going to study how things like that do affect some of our animals. How our we get to the mammal chapter, we'll look at how animals are able to survive. And we'll talk about those things. We'll talk about creepy things and flying birds and beasts and livestock and little things and big things. And so this is what we got in store. Before we get going, though, I want us to kind of review some of our people that we know, and then some of the people that we're going to meet, and then some people we may not meet right now, but maybe later on as we continue through these modules, or in your studies if you want to kind of look further on. But one of the reasons is we want to remember these guys is because this is important. We can Google something and know the information just like that. These guys couldn't do that. They had to do it on their own. I love Jurassic Park when Malcolm sitting around and they're all talking about, oh wow, this is pretty cool, making taking DNA of dinosaurs and making dinosaurs, and Malcolm brings them back to, hopefully it's a little bit about reality, is that, we never thought about if we should, we only thought about if we could, and that we stood on the back of giants to get to where we're at. And that's where we are. We can't forget where we came from. We can't forget who put us here, who led us here. And it always amazes me that, especially like Anton Van Leeuwenhoek, his God gave him this curiosity, and this curiosity led him to make these little handheld microscopes. And the link there, you can go check on him in the link. And he made these little microscopes, and he looked at things underneath the microscope that people, like, you would never see them. You wouldn't see. And again, go back to the cell chapter. Go back to module 4 when we're looking at all the different cells and things, and we looked at our cheek cells and we looked at pond water. How cool was that? How cool was it to go, oh man, I can't see any cheek cells, and then we put them on a micro slide and we stained them and go, oh, there they are. How cool was it to see the onion cells and the cell wall, and then to stain it with iodine to see the big starch molecules that are there, the leukocytes that were there. So, leucoplasts that were there, the storage parts. It was just kind of cool to see all that. Well, Anton Van Leeuwenhoek, Robert Hooke, and some other scientists that we've got here got us there. And Anton Van Leeuwenhoek, he would make a microscope, look at something, he'd put it down, he'd look at something, make another microscope, and looked at it and put it down again. And he was making these little handheld guys, not like microscopes that we have today. And so he's the first microbiologist. Pretty cool. People came from all over to visit him. He had kings and queens visit him. He had other scientists come and visit him. So, like, scientists of that time, they would go visit each other. They would write, and like we're doing Tale of Two Cities, and we're learning about how Dickens wrote in the paper. He wrote the serial novel in the paper. And so every week or every so often when the novel would come out, people would be ready for that next novel. Well, that's the way things went in the early stages in the newspaper. They would put this stuff out there for everybody to read. They don't do that today. It gets published in a journal. And you have to subscribe to that journal to even get it, to even read it. And even then, again, you might not even get that. And so when we do learn of information, we learn of it secondhand or third hand by people who read it and they give us their opinion. And that's crazy. You should read it for yourself. And that's what I love about classical conversation. I love the conversation. I love that we read original stuff. I love that we read and we talk about it because we read it for ourselves and we learn about it. Now, with that being said, we don't have to go back and make little microscopes and live in our garage and look at these things, because we can just check them out on the internet and look at them. We can buy our own microscope and look at them at home. So that's what's cool about today, is that we have that ability. Back then, Robert Hooke, we've talked a little bit about him back in Module 4 too, is that he gave us the term cell, and he wrote a book called Micrography where he wrote about all his observations. And so people would get this book and look at it and read, and it's like, oh, what did Hooke see? Well, then what am I supposed to see? But I'm not seeing that. And so other people would write other books, and they had a chance to write letters and correspond. And again, this whole, writing things in the newspaper, and you can go back to Challenge 1 and, Thomas Paine and all of that, just all of those things that these people had at that time, where that was firsthand information, where we're getting it a lot of times secondhand. And we are kind of getting it secondhand from our book, the Apologia book, from the Apologia writers, but they're going back to firsthand references. We've seen Lorenzo Spallanzani with this idea of biogenesis versus abiogenesis, where proof things just happen, bacteria just appeared, life just appeared in this broth, and he disproved that. And we see Pasteur's up here too. He's another guy we talked about in that chapter, where he finally has to disprove it. We got to get rid of this notion that that things just poof appear, that they have to come. Life comes from other life, and that's where Matthias Slyden and Virchow and Swan all give us the cell theory. And again, it's a theory that cells come from pre-existing cells. Pretty much that's true. When we get to viruses, and in this section that we're going to talk about, we get a little iffy on, is it a cell, is it not a cell, is it alive, is it not alive? and again, we can talk about those things. We're going to talk about Edward Jenner in this module, and we're going to look at how we got to smallpox vaccination. And so we'll talk about the lead up into there and go a little bit more in depth than what we've gotten in the book, but just to kind of give you some background on that. We talked, John Snow is the father of epidemiology. He's the father that we learned about the disease progression. We're going to talk a little bit about cholera. That's his disease that he worked with. And cholera is a food poisoning. The famous, if you go back in history, they were all getting water from a well, and they were making them sick, and he shut the well down, and he proved that was where the disease is coming from. It's an interesting story. Again, if you want to read more about him, we've already talked about Ignaz. We're gonna in module 1, we're gonna talk about him again because he's gonna help lead us up to vaccinations. And of course, Joseph Lister here is the pioneer of antiseptics. Because of Ignaz, we see Joseph Lister comes along and gives us some antiseptics like Listerine, and we learned that isopropyl alcohol alcohol in general will kill bacteria, kill disease. Okay, we got a few more just to mention real quick. Koch is a great medical biologist. We kind of see him in the Koch postulates of disease. We're going to see Iwanowski, which is down here at the bottom, and then Bergerac. Both of them are guys that found viruses, and they're going to lead us into what we know about viruses today. Graham, the Graham staining, we're going to see him. Is it gram positive, is gram negative? We're going to look at that with our bacteria. Walter Reed is just a cool, interesting fella who was the yellow fever fighter. We have a yellow fever vaccine, and he is the one that led all of that. Very interesting if you want to go back and read about him. Paul Ehrlich gives us other ways to identify bacteria. Kind of maybe mention him a little bit as we get into talking about prokaryotics. I wish we could stay here for a little while, but we can't. Alexander Fleming gave us, of course, discovery of penicillin and antibiotics, and so I want to kind of mention him because we are going to talk about antibiotics within this module. So getting into the meat of this module begins first with biological classification, and this is important because we've got to know, what are we talking about? Are we talking about a prokaryotic cell? Are we talking about eukaryotic? What are we talking about? Because they're just are they all in the same group? Are they not in the same group? Why do we put them in this group? And we're going to look at bioclassification keys. Okay, so this is I like how they put it in this chapter, in this module, but it does make this module a little bit more lengthy, and they had to cut some stuff out about bacteria that I wish we could kind of gone more into learning more about the diseases of bacteria. Before we get on, oh Lord, how manifold are your works! In wisdom you have made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. Here's the sea, great and wide, which teems with creatures innumerable, living things both small and great. And that's Psalms 104, 24 through 25. There's 1.5 million species, and that's just species types. That's not the number of species. Okay, that's just the number of species. That's not the numbers of that species. Okay, that's a lot though. And we're going to talk about bacteria and how many there are of them. Just kind of like blow your mind that there's this unseen world you know nothing about, that you don't even get to see, and it's innumerable. But guess what? God gets to see them all the time. He knows them. He made them. He created. Well, not just made them. He created them. Okay. So we're going to get on with it. So we're going to talk about some terms, and I tried to highlight all the vocab terms in yellow as we go through, and then some other words as we go through that you should know. I put the vocab on Quizlet on my website so that you guys can see that. So as we're going along here, taxonomy is what we're dealing with. It's the identification and naming of classifying of organisms. Okay. The binomial nomenclature is the genus species name of that creature. So for instance, we are Homo sapiens, we are humans, and that's how we're classified. We can talk about Canis lupus, which is the wolf, or Canis domesticus, which is the dog. We can talk about Ascarius lumbricoides, which is a roundworm, and it's a cool roundworm. We'll get there. There's a lot of cool names. All of them are in Latin, and we get it from our fellow Carlos Linnaeus. He's the biblical creationist who developed the system of naming organisms. And I don't know, your book doesn't go in. We don't go into, the author didn't go into all of Linnaeus, but Linnaeus's name is Latin. You guys that know Latin, the AUS, US endings. So you see that all the genus species names are Latin. They end that way. So when you're looking at that, I think kind of kick that back in your memory from your Latin days, if you're still doing Latin, if you're doing Latin 2, or if you did Latin 1. So, and he thought, Linnaeus thought of himself kind of as the second Adam in naming things. He kind of thought of himself, well, I'm Adam, and I'm going to name him with a Latin name. So that's kind of him. He is a creationist. He is a Christian. So when we look at his background, we'll see those threads in his background. There are taxons in classification, so largest to smallest, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, and we'll talk about those. Some words to remember, and some other words I didn't put in there, but I'm going to put in there later if you're going to just want to see the PowerPoint itself. Producers, consumers, decomposers. So we know that producers are autotrophs, and for the most part, the producers we looked at were photosynthetic, and they were mainly plants or plant-like protists. We're going to see that some bacteria, some monerans, we're going to look at that word. We're going to look at prokaryotics. Some of them are also producers, but they don't have chloroplasts. So how do they do it? We'll talk a little bit about that. We know consumers are heterotrophs. They've got to have food. They've got to have something, go and find their food, a way to capture their food. We've talked about that back in module 3, I think. And then again, we got particular and module 4. And then when we got into, you guys, when you did the, I think module 3 is the ecology chapter. So we talked a lot about that. And then in module 4 was the cell chapter. Okay. So as we go through here are some words you need to know. So decomposers, we're going to get a little bit more specific with them. We're going to call some of them saprophytes. And we're going to look at that. Some of them we'll know because mushrooms are. We talked about herbivores and carnivores and omnivores. Okay, so it gives you kind of, hopefully we're connecting some things as we're moving through here. We're going to get more specific as we go through here. And so we're going to look at bears. And I think bears are probably the easiest to talk about because when you say bear, you automatically have a picture of a bear. Even if you don't live where we live in West North Carolina and seen a real black bear up close and personal, or at least as you or been to Kate's Cove and drove in and saw them running around, you have probably seen the commercial about the polar bears right now where they're saying that the polar bears need our help because ice caps are melting and on and on and on. So you've probably seen them, and you've probably seen panda bears if you've been to the zoo, and maybe grizzly bear, maybe a sun bear, because the Atlanta Zoo has a sun bear. If you've been to Atlanta Zoo, kind of cool looking bear. So if we look at the bears, all the kingdom is in the animal kingdom. And so every critter that can move or locomotes at least once in their lifetime, means gets up and moves to a new locale, is considered an animal. And of course, they're multicellular and they don't have a cell wall. There's some other things about animals that we're going to talk about a little later. We get into the animal kingdom, what really makes them an animal. And then we get to the phylum Chordata. Chordata means these animals have all the animal characteristics, but they also have the characteristic they have a backbone. They have a vertebral column, a chordate, a central column that's a dorsal column. And we'll get more specific because there's going to be some that you are probably thinking about, well, sharks don't have. They're cartilage. They don't have a bony skeleton. Well, we'll get there. We'll talk about that when we get to the animal kingdom. Okay. We're going to talk about them that belong in the class Mammalia. And mammals of course, have hair, have fur, and you go, no, whales don't, dolphins don't. Yes, they do. They just don't have it all over their body. Okay, seals don't have it all over their body, but they do. But they meet the other criteria of being a mammal. They have live birth and they nurse their young. And you go, wait a minute, what about the duck-billed platypus who lays an egg? Yeah, they lay an egg, but they still nurse their young. They still meet the other criteria for being a mammal. Okay, but that's where the next one, and they're going to differ. They're going to differ in their order. So the monotremes all belong in a different order. The guys that lay eggs belong in that order. The marsupials that have the pouch, the kangaroos, the possums, the wombats, they all belong in that order. So they don't belong in this order, even though they may eat meat. But if they are lay eggs, or if they have a pouch which they raise their babies in, they belong in that order. Okay, but for the most part, everybody that's in the order carnivore, and again, think about it. Say, well, we're carnivores, aren't we? We are, but we're not going to be in this order because as we walk through this, you're going to see that the evolutionists say that we're not in this order because we look more like the primates, and that we might have we talked about this common ancestor that really it's not out there anywhere. We can't find it in the fossil record necessarily. So, that we belong. We have more characteristics that look like primates. So in our class, we'd be in the class, we'd be in the order Primata. We won't be in the order Carnivora. Okay, so if we look at the carnivores, there's a big wide range of carnivores. And we're going to look at some schematics later. So we just kind of want to walk through the bears first and kind of deal with them, and then we'll go back and kind of look at the overall picture again. So all the bears are carnivores. All the bear family are Ursidae, which again, if you look up in the sky and you see the Ursidae constellation, that's the big bear, the little bear, and Ursa minor, Ursa major. So the genus is Ursa, which also means bears. Okay, but then our species get a little particular. Okay, so Americanus is the black bear. Okay, the grizzly bears, and sometimes, and we shouldn't probably put grizzly there, so we're going to give him the Ursa actos horbilius, and so they're going to have a subspecies for grizzly bears. But grizzly bears kind of are in this brown bear kind of category, and the Kodiaks and the grizzlies and the brown bears are all kind of there. They're all still the same bear, okay, but they're different. Okay, so along that kind of line, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. The Ursa Maritimus is the polar bear, and they're of the sea. The Ursa melanorusa means black and white, and then the sun bear, that's where the sun bear is, Malanius. Okay, and we'll look at that. And there's more bears, by the way, but we're just going to take 5 basic bears that we're familiar with. So we look at them; they're all very different. And again, here is the black bear. And then, again, when we talk about this, we can have black bears that are a little bit brown. We can see really dark black bears and really light black bears. So again, in a good, healthy population, you're going to see the full melanin spectrum. Okay, so here's your regular brown bear, and then here's your grizzly bear. Okay, 1 foot difference. Hey, if they're chasing me, I'm not going to go around and look and say, oh, that's a grizzly bear I got attacked by, not a brown bear. Oh, it's just a brown bear. Okay, the polar bear, very distinctive characteristic, very distinctive. The white fur, the fur is hollow, and actually it's clear. It just looks white. Again, if you remember, the back in physical science, white is all the colors of the spectrum that you see. So their hair is hollow and it's clear looking, and their skin is black, and so all of this helps them absorb all the sun energy that they can get when it's sunny to keep them warm. And so pretty stinking cool how God created them. They're just very different in that. So let's go and take a look a little bit more about the different bears and how they verse each other. So I put a lot of links in here to different things, and I put links into the different stuff that as you go through, you can click on them and you can see where I got them. I don't tend to reinvent the wheel. So we got black bears, brown bears, polar bears, and other bears, and so we can kind of see this. This is really cool. It talks about the features of the bears, how they're a little bit different, how again, you got black bears. The neck of a polar bear is longer, and again, if you think about it, it has to be because they're out looking on the ice for stuff, and so just really different. Um, Short claws versus long claws versus padded claws. Again, our black bears, and you go, oh, we're in the carnivores, but look, they eat berries and plants and nuts. Yes, they do. They also most organisms that we're going to talk about are opportunists. If it's there, they're going to eat it. Okay, kind of like a middle school kid. There's food in the refrigerator, they're going to eat it. I don't know if you dealt with middle schoolers. Anyway, but these guys, black bears, tend to be opportunists. They will eat meat. They eat trout. They eat whatever. Unfortunately, because they're opportunists, they also eat garbage, and that's where a lot of black bears get into a lot of trouble, especially in where we live in West North Carolina. Brown bears, grizzly bears, and Kodiak bears. So they put them all in that category. Now, again, you got some really light brown bears, you got some really dark brown bears, you got some really big brown bears. The Kodiaks all tend to live on Kodiak Island. Grizzly bears kind of have a hump to them. Just there's a little bit of difference, but again, they stay in that category, and you can kind of see that some of the differences there. So here's again that picture from that I showed you, the North American bear, and you can read about them, and it's super fun to read about them. I usually when I was teaching biology for public school, especially when I was doing a North Carolina wildlife, we would actually do a whole bear study and we would compare the bears to size and we would literally draw them to scale out in the parking lot. And it's really cool to really see just how big this polar bear really is. They're close to 10 feet, 9 foot. They're more 10 foot. They're just really phenomenal bears. They're just. I mean, if I met one, I'd probably cry and just die right there. Because you probably will. Same thing with the Kodiaks and the grizzly bears. They're just phenomenal critters. Okay, and you can see the comparison of the bears and their bite radius. And there's a movie out there called The Anatomy of a Grizzly Bear Attack. Really cool if you want to know more of that. I used to have my kids watch part of it because we talk about that. We talk about their behavior, talk about this guy that went and visited and took pictures of him and eventually got killed by him. And just it's really good. So it's Anatomy of a Grizzly Bear Attack for you guys. And there's a panda, and then of course the sun bears, the sloth bears. So there's different versions of the other bears, and they're real little. They're like 3 feet or less. So like a big uh, dog kind of thing, but they're not a dog, so careful. Very much different than a dog. Pretty, okay. So hybrids and not bears, and you can kind of go through and go down and look at them. They thought a lot of times that we've had some hybrids. All the time, so like even here, it's not been confirmed. The even the DNA test, I think that most of them done right now is no, they don't do that. So they thought they had a polar bear kind of one that was a grizzly bear, polar bear, because the polar bears, again, like the commercial says, they're leaving the ice pack, they're coming. So they're getting more and more contact with other bears. And no, not happening. They haven't seen it yet. Okay. Not to say it's not going to happen. We see hybrids all the time. Mostly man-made hybrids that we see that we've created, the liger and the tigras, the mule. So again, and we talked a little bit about that back in genetics, in the genetics section, which was, let's see, this is module 9, so module 7. So we talked about it. I don't know if you guys talked about it or not, but we did in my class because it's always interesting. So here is the big schematic, animal chordates, and you can see here. So the starfish are considered animals, but they are not a chordate. They don't have a backbone. They don't meet that requirement. And of course, snakes don't meet the requirement of being a mammal, and a squirrel does not meet the requirement of being a carnivore, but a fox does. But a fox is not in this family. They're in, I want to say, the Canidae family, which is the canine family, the dogs. Okay, and the cats are in the Feliae family, which is the cat family. So again, and for the most part, in the genus species, when you get to to particular species can't breed with other species within a genus, but it does happen occasionally. We know that with dogs, we can talk about dogs, and again, we talked a little bit about this back in module 7, where you can have this idea of kinds happens. Okay, and we're going to talk about it here in just a minute again. So family of carnivorous or omnivorous bears having massive bodies, coarse hair, relatively short limbs, and a rudimentary tails. And we know that's a bear. Okay, so they belong in that family. So let's do the on your own questions, and then we'll talk about giving you some answers and giving you some insights to these, and then give you an insight to what. Okay, so when we're talking here on your own questions, when we're talking about classification of grizzly bears, how are they different than raccoons? Well, number one, we just gave you the family and said bears have like rudimentary tails, little tails. The raccoons have very long tails. I don't know if you've seen a raccoon, if you've had the chance to see a raccoon, the pleasure of seeing a raccoon. We have a raccoon that visits our compost pretty much on a regular basis. Again, they're opportunists. They take very much the opportunity to eat things. When I grow corn, I have to try to keep them out because they'll take that opportunity to eat my corn just like I would. So we're going to look at which levels are the grizzly bears and raccoons grouped together, and which ones are they split from, and how you tell them apart. So again, this is like a raccoon. Looking at a raccoon, and its genus species name, I forget which one actually means that they wash their food. So that's one of the Latin words is they wash. It means for wash, and so they wash their food. They don't always wash their food, but they do. They do sometimes take their food to the water and wash it. So if you really are if we go back to ecology chapter, and we talk about mammals later. If we get a chance to talk about coons later, they if you go look around a water area like a pond or stream, look around there and you'll see their footprints, very distinctive footprints. They have 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4. They have 5. Their tracks in the front foot's littler than their back foot, and so it looks like a little hand. And so you can tell them apart. The thing with bears, if we talk about the Ursidaes and these guys, the Ursidaes, they're grouping too in the family, also talks about how they are plantar walking, so they walk like heel to toe, like we do, heel to toe. So, but the coons also walk that way too. Okay, so that kind of walking distinguishes them from others. And so the family level, they differ a whole lot. And again, they differ because their tail's different, their face is different, and then of course their genus and their species are going to differ because their family differs. So they're all going to be the same until carnivore, but after that, yeah, it's off because they're very different creatures. Okay, and this helps us to know what we're talking about. We're talking about raccoon. We're talking about a black bear. Very very distinctive organisms. So when you compare organisms from several different levels, which case would you expect the greater differences? So again, we're going to go back to that picture, and we're classifying animals. The kingdom level is big. We got everybody. Look at everybody there. We got snails, and we got grasshoppers, and we got fish, and we got birds. Look at the vulture. We got reptiles. See our reptiles there. Our mammals, our porcupine, very formative critters, and you see the scorpions and the tarantula. So we get to vertebrate, all those guys go. So the tarantula, the scorpion, the snail all goes because they're not vertebrates, they're invertebrates. And the invertebrate, their phylums all differ. So the snails are in mollusca, the phylum mollusca, the tarantulas and the scorpions are in the phylum Arthropoda, so which is the biggest of the phylums, which is pretty cool. Down here, they lose this little looks like a skink, which is actually a lizard, not an amphibian, not a relative of the frog. So it's lost right there. So I don't know why it didn't get popped down there. I didn't make this, but I would have made sure that it was there because we also see fish. in this, so in the vertebrate category. But then when we get to the mammal category, we lose all of those other non-mammals. We lose the birds, we lose the amphibians, we lose the fish, we lose the reptiles, because they're not mammals. There's a lot of things that make us mammals that don't make us aves. And if we look back at the reptiles, I think everybody's in the group Reptilia, and in sort of the classes they separate out. And I think everybody's in the phylum Amphibia, and then everybody separates out in the classes. So we're very different. There's a lot of things that make us different, and we'll look at that when we get into the mammal category. We look at mammals. We get to the carnivores, then we got to kick out bats. And you go, well, bats are carnivores too, aren't they? Some of them are. Some of them aren't. And we see that we get, here's one, the meerkat pops up. So in there, and we get a new cat right here popping up here. And we see a badger. I think that's a badger popping up there. But then when we get to bears, then we got a whole nother group. We got the dogs don't belong, the cats don't belong, the badger don't belong. They just don't belong in the group with the bears. And then we can even get to the Ursa category, which we're talking about the big bears. Not the little bears, but the big bears. And you can see here where sometimes panda bears are not in the Ursa. It just depends on what we're talking about. Because panda bears tend to be pretty much herbivores. They're not tend to be an omnivore. And so they're kind of changes a little bit. And then if we're talking about the brown bear, there we are. Okay. And if you go on with this, you can learn more about scientific names and all that kind of stuff too. So, so just click there for some more help. That helps you get through that question. Okay. So the next part is the next section. So I'm going to stop here, let you guys digest that and get your answers on your own questions. And then we'll come back and you can look at part 2. Thank you.